Hi, I wanted to record a quick video for you regarding the two articles. I see a lot of a variety of different approaches, and I want to make sure we're on the same track. So the essay, even though your thesis may be about whether you agree or disagree with reparations, the body paragraphs have to be rooted in both articles. So the body paragraphs have to be about Coates and Williamson, not just your opinion or on it, and not your outside source, any outside source. Okay, so I want to go through some slides regarding these two things and maybe some ideas about things you could quote or things you could look at to see some of the differences. So we're going to look at a little bit on like ways to evaluate the arguments, look at their claim and evidence, and a little bit about their tone. So just some overview, because you might have felt like, I give Coates has this long article, and there's a lot of work put into that. Williamson is really only responding to it. It's not like he wrote a case against reparations separate from Coates. He's responding to Coates. So in that sense, he has a benefit about what to omit or not address and what to include. That's why I included Coates's video, because I think he addresses and is able to kind of respond to a few issues in that video, though he's not responding to Williamson in the video at all. Neither of the works have works cited or reference page, though Coates includes his sources as he goes. If you watch the video, you realize that a lot of these points came about through a blog he was keeping with people giving him ideas about sources and ideas about people to interview and all of that. So it was a couple years in the making, and he wrote it sort of with a lot of documentation included inside, though there's not a works cited page outside of it. There are some points that he doesn't document but are well documented if you read this kind of stuff in the past. Like, for instance, he makes the point that it's equally as probable for a white person with a criminal background to be hired as an African American without a criminal background. And that's been proven over time. There's been 2 or 3 studies on that that have shown that to be true because of bias. And so even though he doesn't document his source on that, that's really well known among people who study this stuff. And so, that's included. Williamson does not include that, and we'll talk about how he uses some examples. He includes some things, but not a lot of sources on some of the other issues. So that's some of the benefits and drawbacks of sort of the sources you're looking at. But again, nothing outside of those sources. So, okay, so for the case for reparations, what are the things you can talk about, or some of the things you can talk about that impact the reader as far as the persuasiveness? The use of epigraphs at the beginning, the moral kind of biblical epigraphs that he uses. The use of the long documented story. Now, this story is a true story, and it's been highly documented. He was able to get a lot of research from Clyde Ross, and he uses that story throughout as a way to frame what happened to an individual. He uses some other stories about the woman Ethel and a few other people throughout, but Ross is sort of the main story. He does have a wide variety and a lot of depth of research. So there's research about redlining, banking crimes, Black Wall Street and how that was eliminated, violence against blacks, lynchings, burning of black schools and churches, assault of veterans, the Rosewood incident, which you may have seen the film on, about research on denying Social Security and GI benefits, how blacks were pushed out of the middle-class neighborhoods, poor living conditions where they were allowed to live. So when they did get housing, a lot of times, so like public housing, there was vermin, there was fires, difficulty with that. Riots, white people rioting when blacks moved into white neighborhoods, and then again, finally, white flight and block busting that speculators would do, and offering contracts instead of mortgages. These are all points he researches and brings up that you can use as examples that make the case for you regarding reparations. And again, he's building this history of an inability to build wealth over time. Okay. He does offer some concessions. He concedes that the lives of black Americans are better, whoops, I should have said than 50 years ago, but the foundation is shaky, and then he gives some reasons why. So he says, yes, there's not like, colored only fountains anymore. There's not like the direct segregation like there used to be, but other sources have shown that the income gap is the exact same between whites and blacks as it was in 1970. So certain things haven't been improved. Counter arguments he also gives us the cultural pathologies. A lot of people say, well, African Americans just need to try harder and have good behavior, and basically that's been shown to not be true, and that's just sort of a view of a kind of a racist approach to addressing and not taking responsibility for some of these other inequities that have happened over time. Another one that comes up a lot is like if African American fathers were just like their poverty and violence in their neighborhoods would go down. Well, he gives a lot of examples as to why that's not true as well, and that how fathers are there and kids still get killed or get get involved in drugs or have other things happen when fathers are trying to do the right thing. So that kind of moots that point. Those are his counter arguments. He also makes the point if white people have had 395 years of preferential treatment, in housing and in laws about work and all of that, he doesn't say this, but he kind of intimates, shouldn't African Americans receive some sort of directed reparations? He doesn't say cash necessarily. He doesn't even say what type, though he talks about HR 40, which talks about, offers some suggestions. But he also talks about this, spiritual reckoning, shouldn't America kind of, get off its high horse and, look at the reality of where we're at and include that in the idea of moving forward to pay some sort of reparation in some way, okay? So that could look like a lot of different things. He gives a comparison to Germany's reparations after World War II, and that's kind of a helpful section. He talks about, in the video, he talks about things like, maybe, African Americans get free college tuition, or maybe, maybe there is, or compensated tuition, or maybe there is something where, mortgage rates for African Americans could be much lower than what's for other people. Just some ideas to kind of address some of those past inequities that went on for so long. So the case against reparations, Kevin Williamson, he includes some strategic concessions. He compliments Coates on the quality of his writing. He spends several paragraphs talking about this. It is true, this history of repression of African Americans. He quotes Lyndon Johnson. He re-quotes Lyndon Johnson. He points out all these really important things that Coates says, and he admits it and says, yes, these are all true. He points out some omissions in examples that Coates gives. One in particular about Washington D.C. school reform, about working with whites, and why sometimes when school reform is offered, and it could help African Americans, then they deny and don't want it. And so he gives examples like that. He gives financial growth rates in various years. He says that the financial growth rate regarding black and white median household growth was increased for African Americans more than whites. Now here he doesn't give a lot of sources for it, so it's a little hard to follow. This is the one area I thought he really needed to add more research here to kind of explain where he got some of that information. He also points out that Coates makes an argument for moral or spiritual reckoning for white supremacy. And so he believes this two-pronged approach, he doesn't think you can ask for economic stuff, but also ask for symbolic reparations. It can be one of the two, but not both. And so you have to ask, is that an either or, a logical fallacy? You can either do this or not, or this, but not both. Why? And why do you believe that? And then he also offers hypothetical examples. He says, well, what if slavery never happened? Or what if it were the Jews? Or what about, Vietnamese people? And he brings up these other groups in an effort, I think, to kind of show that, I don't know how that's going to respond to the readers, if they're going to think, well, all these groups are going to want something and kind of have a fear tactic, or if it's to show that inequities continue to occur everywhere and it shouldn't just be for African Americans, though African Americans were obviously enslaved and omitted from sort of full participation in the United States for a long time. So these are kind of the things that he makes a case for. So I wanted to run through those very quickly. I know you hopefully have read the essay, both essays, and have annotated it. You understand the arguments. You can't just make this argument about whether you agree or disagree based on sort of some opinion or something you saw on TV. It has to be only on these two articles. And you have to kind of deal with the arguments, the strengths and weaknesses of each argument. Your thesis could just be about the quality of both arguments, and you could even, like, let's say you totally agree with Coates, but you don't like something he does, you can talk about that. Or if you totally agree with Williamson, but you don't like one of those approaches, you could talk about that too. Okay, so you can talk about the strengths and weaknesses of both. All right. If you have other questions, please let me know. I was here kind of hoping someone would like call or email and ask for an appointment, but I hope you're well, and I look forward to reading the next step, which would be, I guess we're doing peer review in 2 days. I set up the groups, but if you want to check in with me a little bit, I'd be happy to talk to you. Thanks.